I define product marketing as closing this delta between the perceived value a customer has of the product and the actual value that you've delivered them. You have to be an order of magnitude better than the alternative to get word of mouth. You need to give customers an experience they did not know previously existed.
Ready to go? Nilan, this is such a joy to do. I've been really looking forward to this. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for the invite, Harry.
Not at all, but I would love to start with some chronology. So how did you first make your way into the world of growth and product? And what was that real entry point for you?
Actually, going all the way back, I did maths at university, which I advise everybody to do out there. But it was quite formative. I love maths mainly as... training for university level maths was about looking at problems and trying to find a completely different way to look at the problem that no one else had looked at before that enabled you to solve it in a way no one had done it before.
Sorry, I just have to ask that. You said there about kind of doing things differently and in ways that other people hadn't done before, and why you like maths in that way. I always wonder, are playbooks good or bad?
In product and in growth, where this reaches its fortes when there is a reproducible model. When the playbook becomes something that feels like a reproducible model, and that is in two forms. Usually there's a kind of a market expansion playbook, so we know this works and we're going to keep doing this again and again and again. And in my experience, it's usually disappointingly not much. Like there's very few truly globally scalable products that you build once and they just kind of go everywhere. Every country has a nuance usually. Then that could be regulatory, it could be financial systems, it could be cultural, and these are the things that get stuck in the way of the playbook.
Terribly annoying. Much nicer if it was just repeatable. I actually find playbooks can be more applicable on channels. Like there's a playbook to creating good Twitter content. There's a playbook to creating short form video hooks. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and that type of growth hacky marketing side, absolutely. I'm sure you see this and you've quite successful at the podcast playbook, but the bit that the edge is usually in the creativity. Yeah. So when
telling the story, I completely agree.
Or when someone figures a different way, a different form of content that suddenly gets cut through, and suddenly everyone will start copying that. But these kinds of bursts usually have a outsized outcome than the generic. I
agree. I always think actually to Seth Godin and the Purple Cow, which is kind of the power of being different, not better. And I think we get to that point when we look at content landscapes today, for example. We have that. How did you come to Wise then? Because you were an advisor at Wise first, right?
Yeah. So just going back through the long story. So I was consultant for a while, and then dot-com boom 2 happened, and I started working with companies, getting them online. Most of the shops on Oxford Street didn't have online shops, so I helped build and launch their shops. And they asked me to run their shops. And once I ran a revenue line, I realized that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I've been doing that for the last more or less 15 to 20 years. I think even 20 years now. It's because it's so hard. Figuring out how you get people to turn up on your site or download your product and use it. That's you need to use psychology, marketing, mathematics, technology, everything. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So starting off with very large companies, and then over time working with earlier and earlier stage till I ran into Christo and Tarvet probably 12 years ago now.
Yeah, it was 12 years ago. I stalked the shit out of you before this. So I think it was 12 and a half years ago. Where was TransferWise then?
I met them. You'll enjoy this. I got introduced to them by an angel who I'd helped previously. And he said, you've got to meet these guys. They're just two of them. They have a great product. They have no customers. And they definitely need someone like you. And so I met them, and they had a great product. They had no customers, and I started working with them, helping launch their first marketing campaigns, helping start to build a product part-time, and then after a couple of years went full-time and started building the team.
Before we dive into kind of the marketing channels that we leveraged at the early days, what worked, what didn't, just to set the foundations, what do Wise do? What are the products? And set those.
Wise is focused just on one thing, which is solving the problems with cross-border money transfer. So the one market we're focused on is the cross-border money movement market, which is huge. right? So it's like about 1 trillion in terms of cross-border flows for consumer, about 10 trillion for SMB. The problems with cross-border money transfer, like it's slow, it's expensive, it's hard to do, and it's not very transparent, frankly.
Okay, so we have this very strong belief that actually these additional fees are wrong. We should make it more transparent, and we should actually remove them in most cases, in all cases. So what is that entry then? Like, what were the first channels you did when you came in? How did you get the first customers?
Our first customers came from and the day we launched Wise was when the TechCrunch blog post went up, and our first TechCrunch interview happened, and I remember it. And then the post went out, and then you saw the first customer that we didn't know, that we hadn't found ourselves, kind of started trickling in through that. Post that, it was all very hacky, word of mouthy, right? So trying to find communities of people that were sending money internationally and starting to talk about Wise with them.
Does that mean like seeding Facebook communities?
When I talk through the growth model now, it'll sound very logical. But in the early days, like with every startup, you just try everything, right? So we tried absolutely every single marketing channel in a very systemic way, as well as trying hard to get word of mouth to work.
What worked?
Everything did work, but to differing extents. So we had paid marketing working well. We still do. It's about 30% of the 1.5 million customers we acquired last quarter came in through paid. About 70% came in through word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And if you went back 10, 12 years, it was about 30% through paid, 70% through word of mouth. And that paid's been really important, and it works really hard. Getting underneath the skin of it, what's really working there was social for us, which started off being Facebook, now has gone increasingly towards YouTube as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Talk to me, like, what have been lessons in making YouTube work? That's interesting.
So it's taking a step back. Why social worked for us is ultimately word of mouth works. So people telling their friends about Wise and this great product and driving word of mouth is what's been the big driver of Wise's growth. And when the marketing amplifies that, that's when it works best. So Facebook supports marketing to your friends. So if you have a usage of Wise, then it's likely that your friendship group may need to send money internationally. Think French students in London know French students in London. Small business owners who are exporting will know other small business owners that are exporting. And when you advertise to and target to people who are similar to your existing customer base, then this becomes pretty effective. So that's where the Facebook thing started. On YouTube, this more came out of our SEO playbook around creating really useful content for our end users.
What does that mean, creating useful content for end users?
The way I think about content, starting with SEO and then going to YouTube, is there's two broad kinds of content that I see people push out there, and I encourage people building startups to do. One is what I call on-topic content, and you should really think through how you can own all the on-topic content in your chosen vertical. And then there's the off-topic adjacent. So I'll talk you through with examples. So on the on-topic side, for Wise, if it's sending money internationally, you want to build the best page on the internet that tells people how to send money to India, for example, right? But then you can go a step further. You know your customers are with Barclays. So if you build a better page than Barclays has on how to use Barclays to send money internationally, then people will link to this page and it will naturally go up the rankings, and you'll start getting traffic on Barclays, on Western Union, etc. If you start helping people understand their fees, the exchange rate, this page becomes even more useful. What else do you need? When you send money internationally, you need those like pesky BIC and IBAN codes. So obviously if you search for a BIC or an IBAN code, you'll find Wise there, because we've built pages on every BIC and IBAN code. We bought and built our own BIC calculator and IBAN calculator and converters, so that you can look up your own bank's BIC and IBAN, which is surprisingly hard to do with some banks. So yeah, making really useful on-topic content for people trying to move money internationally is
It reminds me
cool.
of actually Zoopla's strategy of having where you put in your postcode and it'll do like a guesstimate of your house price.
Yeah.
And it's a very useful tool, which is actually an incredible lead gen tactic.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the on-topic one, and the off-topic is where you go slightly further. So maybe you're looking at content that's useful for students living in London, and then that naturally turns into YouTube content, if that makes sense. Increasingly, we even have some of our own sub-brands running this stuff focused on different demographics and different markets.
What didn't work?
So what's really hard to do is above the line, and getting it above the line to work. And I think we've run above the line TV
For
campaigns.
those who don't understand, what is above the line?
Above the line is brand advertising. Yeah. So you have, like, generalizing terribly, there's two types of marketing: performance marketing, where you spend some money and you try to measure a user turning up, and then brand, where you spend money and you can do it relatively strategically. You could spend the money to solve a perception problem in the market, to raise awareness of your product, and then you have to measure in, like, maybe a much more difficult way what the impact of this is. The things that struggled to work were getting above the line to work. When you look at our marketing mix, it looks light on that, and we still wouldn't say have cracked it. It's hard, right? So our customers aren't everybody in the UK, for example, or everybody in Australia.
Specifically, why is it hard to get above the line working, and why do you think you've struggled?
So I think there's two parts that will make above the line easier. If you have a mass market product that's relevant to everyone, then generally mass market channels will work. And the second part is, who else is competing for that eyeball at that point in time? Can they monetize that user better than we can, and therefore they can spend more in acquiring the customer? So these are the economical side of this, and then the kind of acquiring a targeted audience. These are the parameters that make it a little challenging.
Can I be blunt?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know how spicy I can be.
No, it's much.
Revolut have so many different products today.
Yeah.
I'm sure they can monetize across those different products if they wanted to more efficiently on a per customer basis. Like, they could extract more value from them.
That's a good question. We should definitely go deep into this. So, leaving the marketing to a side, I think let's talk about fintech and neobank business models, right, in general. So our overall business strategy is that we drive our costs down every quarter, and then every quarter after we reduce our costs, we add our margin on top, and that's our price. Okay, and the kind of strategic thesis at the heart of Wise is whoever has the lowest cost, highest quality product will take the whole cross-border market. The challenge to this is if somebody kind of cross-subsidizes this cross-border stream with another stream where they're earning a lot of income on. So neobanks have two other principal streams that are really valuable, holding deposits and what's called interest income from their customers. And the second is lending. Let's come back to lending. So without talking about Revolut specifically, but just talking in general, like any neobank could, or any bank, full stop, could take its interest income and use it to offer cross-border transfers for free, for example. Yeah. There's two challenges with this. One is, like, it's actually very expensive moving money internationally. So you couldn't do it for free, right? But you could kind of maybe subsidize the cost a little bit. So working it backwards, like if your customers are moving 10 billion and it costs you 3% to move that, that's an awful lot of your interest income that will go in moving this. So it's incredibly expensive covering the cost. The second challenge, though, is what happens if customers expect to get all of their interest back. So, and that's the trend that we've begun to see and begun to drive in the market around this. So historically, banks offer low retail deposit rates and then lend out at much higher amounts. And that difference is called the bank's net interest margin. It's how they make money. Over the last 2 years, as interest rates have gone up, what we've seen is a number of innovative products entering the market where consumers can now get access to effectively central bank rates, which is what the bank gets, which is much higher, about between 3 and 5% at the moment. Wise, we offer this to our end customers as well. So in Wise, in the Wise account, you can push one button and hold all of your cash in government bonds. And that means you'll get a 3 to 5% interest rate. When you spend with your card or you send money out, we aggregate up and sell those bonds. When you put more money in, we put more in. But what this means is we're in the market with an interest rate of 4%. So if a neobank starts using that money to subsidize another product, it becomes unfeasible because then people would churn. So I think these two bits, right? Running the cross-border services for as low cost as we can. Others have a much higher transaction cost of running it. Two, putting pressure on the other income streams that other neobanks would have around net interest margin, I think end up with a long-term better outcome for customers.
Back to above the line being so challenging. I'm just intrigued. Why bother doing it then? If it's so difficult to do and you can actually get a relatively guaranteed performance marketing strategy, why bother?
Just you try everything. So like I'm sure when you're starting out, and even still today, you still keep trying everything to test to see whether the assumptions you had previously are still true, whether someone's come up with a new creative or a new creative way of using the format that gets cut through and works better.
Did CAC stay the same over time? Do they get cheaper? I'm always thinking this with companies as I invest today. I'm like, they should get cheaper over time because you build brand, word of mouth ensues more, you become more well known. But then part of me thinks they get more expensive because you saturate your core market and you're reaching kind of further and further edge cases in terms of customers. Which one is it?
I think that's pretty smart what you just said there. So I think it is, I think both those things happen literally at the same time. So as you start out, usually there isn't much competition, especially maybe on the very targeted audiences that you're going after at the beginning. And then over time, as the competition enters, it kind of goes up in the market, and then slowly over time comes down. For us, we had this really fun challenge. There's still a bunch of the market, not much. So I'd say about 10-15% of the market that will Google before they send money. So they'll Google send money, cheapest way to send money to India, right? And people were doing this before Wise existed, and companies like Western Union existed there. Western Union is like 7 to 8 times more expensive than Wise. So they could spend 7 to 8 times more than us on marketing. And therefore, there's no way we would ever be able to compete on those SEM key head terms. So that was the point at which, when we started realizing the economics of this, we pushed so hard towards word of mouth. And moving on to word of mouth, what it became was understanding what would it take to build a product that's so good that people would talk about it. How do you instrument that product, and how do you organize a company and systemize it to enable and drive that word of mouth growth?
This is too good. So like, I always have founders who are very product led, and they're like, I built amazing product and customers will come. And I go, no, like, distribution is a product in itself.
Yeah, totally.
And we must create and archetype that. Do you agree with me, or is that what you're saying in terms of create such a great product that people talk about it?
Totally. But so just stepping it through and making that more practical. With us, customers talked about price, talked about speed, talked about ease of use. You can measure price, you can measure speed, you can measure ease of use. When we enter a market, we find that if we are slightly cheaper than the incumbents, then we don't really get hockey stick-like growth. Banks are at 6%, we're at 0.3 in most markets. When we launched in some markets, say we were at 5.8. When you're at 5.8, you don't get any growth. So we learned you have to be an order of magnitude better than the alternative to get word of mouth. You need to give customers an experience they did not know previously existed. So when founders say I built a great product, it needs to be that great. People didn't know you could move money instantly, right? So we're moving about 60 billion pounds instantly from one side of the world to another. And that is the kind of experience to get people talking about
but actually I think you can be taken for granted unless you message it well. My question to you is, like, unless you're very explicit about those like benefits, it's going to be very challenging for consumers to understand them. If you told me, Harry, 0.3% transfer fee, I'd be like, cool. But it wouldn't strike me that, shit, that's a 20th of the cost of the competitor. So how do you think about product marketing and messaging, the measured data of how you're better?
I think you more or less got to my definition of product marketing. So actually, it was my dad that taught me this. So my dad used Wise, and then he'd use Barclays, and then he'd tell me, like, he'd see Barclays would say it's £3, and he'd see with Wise it will cost £2.99, and he'd miss the whole hidden fee in the exchange rate. And so he'd tell me, yeah, I like your product, and it saves me like 10, 20p. And I realized that even my dad didn't understand how much he was saving. So we spent a lot of time trying to create a UX that explains to customers really clearly, like a picture that says, this is how much how much this transfer cost you, and this is how much you would have spent with your bank by showing the rate and how much was hidden in the rate. And we iterated this till the point that when we show this to people, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was that amount. And then I learned one of the biggest areas of growth that we had was when we took that picture and we put that on the success screen. So once you've done a transfer and it completed, it's like you saved £25. They believe they saved some money, but they didn't believe the £25. But then we put this, what we call a comparison graph on that page that really like explains to you where exactly this number comes from. People are like, oh my God. And this thing started getting screenshots and shared on Twitter. We saw like, I think it was a 3 to 4x increase in our recommendation rate off the back of that. And what's changed here is we haven't changed anything. Customers are still saving the same amount, but now they know what the value we've delivered is. And so I define product marketing as this closing this delta between the perceived value a customer has of the product and the actual value that you've delivered them, which is usually could be higher and is in our case. And the way I look at the return on our product marketing is how much have we closed that. And I know that if our customers believe they're having more value from Wise, they recommend more. So that's kind of how it all works through.
I totally get you. Do you know what I think there? The best thing is like, how do you create UGC on the savings gap that you create? Which is like, how do you create, congratulations, you saved $25 or £25. With that, you could have bought 33,000 straws.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like a shareable thing.
Yeah,
where it's like 33,000 straws, huh?
Yeah.
That's fucking random.
The other one that we had this on was on speed, as like 60% of our transfers are instant. And customers would go through the transfer and get to the page and we'll say, the money's there. And then I remember a research team like interviewing these customers and asking customers, where do you think the money is? And they go, I don't know, it's with Wise, it's in the account. You realize customers didn't believe the money was actually gone from the UK to Australia and was available for somebody to spend in their bank account in under 20 seconds. That's how we define instant. And so we built a little whizzy animation that kind of like shows the money going and then landing there. And then when we ask people, where's the money? They go, it's in the other person's account. That's amazing. They can go spend it. So again, like this UGC really bringing to life that, and we could have a lot of fun with that went faster there than sometimes like not as fast as speed of light, but pretty damn close sometimes.
How quickly do you know when a product is working, a new product is working?
Yeah, it's pretty fast when you see the kind of like hockey stick happen. A good example is Brazil. When we launched the Wise account in Brazil, it went like that. It's still going like that in Brazil, and that's mainly because we found a way to help Brazilians move money internationally really cheaply, especially when traveling.
In a way that Nubank haven't.
In a way that Nubank haven't, to the point of this is what our partnership with Nubank is. So Nubank have offered the Wise account now to their customers, and we have Nubank and Wise co-branded cards to their Ultravioleta, their most valuable customers. And we continue to work with Nubank to kind of improve and build out that proposition.
How do you know when to kill a product?
We know when to kill a product usually when it's not working, when it's not paying for itself. That's a good sign.
My question is, it obviously doesn't pay for itself. And I think about content a lot in this. Why have we been successful? Honestly, it's not my dulcet tones or my charm, clearly. I just grinded longer than anyone else. And for 3 years, I didn't make any money. And we didn't have 1,000 plays on a show.
Yeah.
And so like the payback period is so long.
Yes.
So, and it wasn't obviously working. And so I find often it doesn't pay for itself until it does.
That's entirely
And then
fair.
it really does.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one is when it doesn't pay back for itself. And you're right, that isn't a problem, but it does become a problem if, imagine the costs of running it become really high. So when the costs are marginal, you can kind of keep something ticking over. When the costs become really high, you have to pay for that. And that means we're going to charge this customer over here to keep this going. And then suddenly this becomes less competitive. So we've learned to be very disciplined on this front. The second point is it's not the financial cost that's the real inhibitor. It's the people cost. It's your time. So how much time have you got to keep running a product that you hope will take off? And what else could you be? What's the opportunity cost? And what what else could you be doing with that time? And there are some things where teams have grinded away and grinded away and grinded away at Wise, and then things have taken off. And then there are other ones where they've grinded away, and then there's been this other thing that started moving really fast that they've jumped on top of and killed this one instead.
I guess there's also like this outcome scenario planning, which is important as well, which is like, to what extent is the upside capped, unlimited, a needle mover? And if it's like a massive needle mover for the company, which could be unlocking South America, massive, we could probably hold out longer to see. But if it's like, actually SMBs in south of England need this, or it's a much more, whatever that is, that outcome is smaller, fucking cut it quicker.
Just, I mean, you're figuring it all out. So that's absolutely right. So what we do is we have in our heads like what is, and Google have this famously, like it has to be $1 billion business. So we have, what is the minimum hurdle rate that something needs to hit? And you're right, we don't time bound it, but we shouldn't be working on things that can never be huge. Yeah. So everything has to be huge. That every team at Wise is clear what huge means.
What is the minimum hurdle rate for you?
Very big. Unfortunately, as a public company, I don't think I can share the specifics, but it's very big. And the bit I'll share back is generally, it should cover we look for payback generally within 12 to 24 months. Yeah. So you look at the costs, how much would it cost? And then you can work backwards to what that
Does that frustrate you being a public company? Because you have less flexibility on extended paybacks, because public markets are essentially saying, hey, I mean, they're a short-term voting machine in many respects, not a long-term weighing machine.
Get back
to that. And so, respectfully, they don't always give you the luxury of 24 to 36 months for a more outlandish bet that could pay back. They want the much more tangible short-term. Is that frustrating for you?
No, I think we haven't changed since we've been public, and a really good example of a very long-term bet that is weighed in the public market very visibly is our investment in price. So we dropped price. We've dropped price quite a lot this year so far. So say we drop price by 10%. There's not 10% of marginal customers hitting our product that will then switch to Wise at that point in time. Does that make sense? So, so you drop price by 3%. It's not like magically there's a 3% who weren't going to use Wise and now are going to use Wise. So incrementally we got more revenue. Yeah. So this is much more a long-term bet, kind of like Amazon's, that you keep chipping away at driving down your cost and your price, and eventually the market will switch to you. And so we very publicly and so the people looking for us, investors looking for us to kind of like optimize the company for maximizing growth in the next 3 months, like this doesn't make any sense. Maximizing growth in 6 months doesn't make any sense. But maximizing growth over a 5-year horizon or 3 to 5 year horizon, where this makes a lot of sense. So the public markets, they're there, and they will, there are, people will invest in the stock. People will look at the short-term results and make their own judgments about it. But there's enough investors out there that buy into our longer-term vision on price, which means we can keep doing this. On the challenging side, though, there'll always be noise from people that don't buy into your strategy. But as long as you can find people that buy into your stock, you're fine.
Do you worry with the outcome scenario plan, like estimating upside? The challenge is some of the biggest outcomes come from toys, or come from non-obvious ideas that started off as side projects. One of the engineers kind of tinkering about it, and actually it wasn't a big ambitious play. It was kind of something that someone just kind of tried, and whoa, it took off.
Yes, this is true. This has happened. So we encourage this. So a fun bit we haven't got to is how we run. So historically, we ran in autonomous independent teams, and that literally is what it sounds like. So when I joined, so about 10 odd years ago, every quarter we'd get together and every team would talk about their plan. They get feedback from everyone around, including customer support to Christo and Tarvet, and then they'd adjust their plans, and then they'd execute, and then they share back how they did. And this kind of made logical sense. We had teams around each of the big problems you need to solve to get to low-cost instant transfers. We had a team on driving down the costs of KYCing a customer, a team on making it easier to onboard, a team on making the pay-ins, the payouts really cheap and quick.
So just so we understand, these verticalized teams are by product or by function?
They're cross-functional teams with everything you need in order to move those KPIs.
Got you. So like independent companies.
Yeah, but with a matrix structure where all the engineers report up to CTO, all the product managers up to me, and designers up to the VP of design, etc.
And they're all fighting for resources?
No, they're all able to, if a team's doing well, then and it's able to invest, it can ask for more resources and able to take off.
Was that a good structure?
That worked, and it worked up to a point. Now we have teams into squads and squads into tribes, and these guys and ladies hold the teams accountable in very much the same way. So the strategy still does come bottom up. Does that make sense? Because the teams are still incentivized to do this, but the accountability is there around their local leaders who make sure that it's working.
I don't understand, the transition from these independent autonomous units to squads and teams and tribes.
Yeah, I'll step it through. So a good way of explaining this is like as I shared at the beginning, every quarter they would stand up and talk through their plans. This works fine when it's 6 teams. When it got to 30 or 40, it stopped working. So we started grouping those teams into units. Call them squads.
Yep.
And then you kind of hired somebody to run the squad and tell them you're accountable for the outcomes of the squad. And so that same structure that we were running when we were a startup is kind of happening within the squad. Does that make more sense?
Totally does. Where does that break down?
So we went from squads to tribes. It keeps laddering up. So it works. It even works when you're public, because when I stand up and talk through our product strategy, I've kind of like a whole engine that synthesizes all of these up and helps me talk through to the market. Where are we going? What are the big levers of growth in Wise? And like I talked you through at the beginning, where we have a money transfer business, we have an account business, we have an enterprise business, and can explain what our strategy is in each of these areas. But they all come bottom up, rather than me saying, I think our strategy in X should be this.
You mentioned the different business units there, and there's quite a few. And you mentioned like 30, moving from 6 to like 30. But how do you think about effective product marketing when you have so many different ones? It's so easy when it's like, hey, like fast and quick, done. But when it's 30 and you have like multi-currency accounts and cards and the partnership in Brazil, how do you do it?
Yeah, it's not easy, and I wouldn't say we've done it particularly well, still work in progress, but the answer is you devolve it as much as possible. Great example is Wise Platform, where we're taking Wise, our infrastructure out, and we're selling it to banks. So most of the neobanks in the world use Wise. Google Wallet is powered by Wise. Stripe uses us. So platforms use us too. But probably more excitingly, some of the largest banks in the world are starting to use Wise. It's done very well in APAC. So some of the largest bank in Indonesia, second largest in Japan, third largest in South Korea.
So you run it as a separate business, really?
Within Wise. And so to get to your product marketing question, this team and this squad within Wise has to do its own marketing. So we run, I kickstarted it, Wise Connect, our enterprise conference. We run it in London, in Singapore, and in San Francisco. And we've gone from a standing start to doing that in I think we're now in our 2nd year of running it 3 times. And this time around in London, we managed to fill a room with 200 bankers from tier 1 banks in Europe. So we do have a centralized marketing function, but really it's devolving and embedding marketing within those teams.
How do you prevent brand confusion when you have successful product marketing in one category, when it's like, hey, we've sold so well in terms of product marketing for simple and cheap, and then the bankers are like, really?
Yeah,
we're going to use Wise as B2B.
Or going further, like our consumer marketing can feel like it's bashing banks. Like how do we tailor that? 2 bits here. One is we do have a very strong brand marketing team that puts the architecture in place around all of this and thinks through like what is the Wise brand, what is the platform brand, etc. And then from a creative strategy, everyone understands that we're going to end up becoming an API business at Wise. Like in a 5 to 10 year period, the majority of our customers won't be using our apps. They'll be in banks. And therefore, we need to evolve our marketing strategy. We can't be having stuff here that that makes it harder for that to happen. So
do you need a brand if you're going to be an API business in 10 years?
We absolutely need a brand. If you're going to be an API, it's just a different kind of brand as a B2B
You don't
brand.
need a consumer brand, you need a B2B brand.
So there's a very fun part around how the consumer business and the B2B business work with each other. No bank would ever integrate Wise, would ever use our infrastructure if our consumer business didn't exist. Our consumer business sets the expectations in the market of it's got to be cheap. It's got to be easy to use. A consumer business has taken something like between 10 to 20% of some of the major banks in the UK's volume.
I remember when I interviewed Terry Angelos from MasterCard when he was running their M&A team. And he said to me, you ever wonder why these massive card transaction machines sponsor football tournaments? And it's because consumer trust is everything. And so when you go into a store in Colombia and you see Visa or MasterCard, as a consumer, you see it on the side of the Bernabeu and you're like, trust. No, I know that brand. And that is the power of brand for us and for Visa.
So we stumbled on this earlier at Wise. So obviously, anyone out there starting a fintech business, when you talk to your customers and find out why they aren't using you, it's because they don't trust you. And the first thing anyone will tell you is the way to build trust is brand marketing. And actually, it's really hard actually to build trust because you're like my dad was used to using his bank, and like you can go into a bank, you can touch a bank, you can feel a bank, and suddenly you see an ad on the internet that says cheap money transfer, and you're going to click it and you trust it. You have to spend a ton of money on marketing to get somebody to trust you with their money. And the pivot we made was realizing that it's much easier to get people to trust their friends. They already trust their friends. And if you focus on giving them a great service, then that covers the trust thing for us.
So how does that change your strategy then?
No, not really. So what we learned was like we do have all the usual things you'd expect us to invest in from a product marketing perspective to tell customers this product is safe. However, when we're a 70% word of mouth business, I'm under no illusion that most of the work on getting people to trust our product is from our customers telling their friends it's safe. My money turned up at the other end.
So like, I had Val Schultz, who was the first head of growth at Revolut on the show. And he was really interesting. He was like, we changed product strategy to really focus on group payments because fundamentally social pressure drives adoption. And actually, if you have 9 people playing football and there's 11 in the team, they'll say, fuck's sake, Nilan, like get a Revolut card so we can actually pay for the pitch together. And it changed product strategy by realizing that friends drive adoption.
That's very smart.
I thought it was quite a good one.
Yeah, it's very, very smart. I think like lots of the neobanks, when you look at Monzo, you look at Chime, they find a hack that really drives adoption. I think Chime with get paid a day early. Because of the quirks of the US payment system, you can get paid a day early if you switch to using Chime. People switch to using Chime. And then similar, this kind of type of social pressure and some of the features Revolut built out in the early days definitely helped drive their adoption.
What hack you did worked best?
I think it's stuff I've covered already. Just sharing with people how much they've actually saved was probably the single biggest. The other part I didn't share. So within this 70% that's word of mouth, about say 20 to 30 is refer a friend, and the rest is pure word of mouth. And the refer a friend, we've tried everything under the sun. So we've tried sending chocolate. Like you refer someone to Wise, you get money. Like I get money, you get money. We both get money. We've played with different amounts of money.
From an economic psychology perspective, does the amount of money that you offer as an incentive drive a correlatory return?
So what happens is it drives users, but it doesn't drive what I call customers. So a customer, if you define as a profitable user, like it's very easy to drive users, right? Because if you give an incentive like that, but when you look at the growth off the back of these, like giving a very heavy incentive, you'll see something that looks like a hockey stick. If you look at revenue or like profit, it'll look much, much more tame, right? And then when you try to understand the marginal cost of the extra incentive, it generally will fall off.
How do you think about knowing the CAC budget that you have? Because like LTV is varying, and I think actually for banks today it's becoming increasingly challenging. Before, banks and fintech products, you had incredible stickiness and your LTVs were long. Actually, now I think you have this increasing transience between different services. Most Monzo users are also Revolut users. They're also probably a traditional bank user as well from their teenage years. They kind of have, and so the LTVs are more variable. which changes your CAC budget. How do you think about that?
So I think the best marketers, performance marketers that I've worked with over the last 10 to 15 years, they know this. So in businesses I've built previously, and just some of the people say that built Booking.com or Zalando or some of the early Rocket guys, it was always around when you're advertising, say you're advertising on SEM, on search engine marketing, and you get better and better at breaking down into smaller and smaller groups your campaigns. For that campaign, you understand really well the cost, and for that campaign, you understand really well the LTV. And every campaign you run will have a different LTV, and you need to kind of aggregate up campaigns to a level that you can get a decent read on the LTV. And the other way I think is, it's at the end of the day, what you're doing is making a bet. So I'm going to spend £50 on acquiring on my CAC because I think I'm going to earn £50 back in a year. And the other way I run marketing teams, so when I've spent that £50, I am now in the red, right, in acquiring the customer, and I'm hoping it's going to track back to this. And the discipline of tracking how much are we down from all the bets that we've spent, and what's our floor in terms of how much you're prepared to spend and how much you're prepared to lose, because it only needs to take, like, you're not in control of whether these users are going to keep coming back and using your product. There's hundreds of other variables in there. And that's the fastest way in which businesses go bust, right? When they spend a bunch of money acquiring customers that turn up, but the LTV doesn't turn up in the way that you expected.
When have you got it wrong, and what did you learn from that?
Probably the best example of this was how we became profitable. So we became profitable about 4 to 5 years ago, and every year we would go raise money prior to this point. And every year, you probably know this from your portfolio, every year when we raise money, we told ourselves, this is the last time we're going to raise money. And we do
always the last time.
Yeah, we do a little business plan that said we're going to be profitable in like 12 to 24 months. And then every year we get to this point, like 12, 24 months later, and we've come up with all these really good ideas that we should invest in, which could be engineering ideas, they could be marketing ideas, and we'd come up with these ideas, we thought they could work. And then every year we'd need to go raise again. And then we got to this point where it was about 4 to 5 years ago, and winter was beginning to set in. And we could raise, but we decided it would actually be far better to become masters of our own destiny and become profitable. We became profitable in about 6 to 9 months, and there was only one cost we changed to get there, which was our marketing spend. And I think I've shared this publicly before, and this is about 4 years ago. We halved our marketing spend. We dropped 10% on customers and 1% on revenue. And when you're in a business that's going grow, 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 and then you turn around and you tell the marketing team and you work through the detail of it, we now need to get to profitability. This type of trick is hiding in there. And I've learned now, after I did that once, I was like, this kind of inefficiency will build up all the time in marketing. So about 2 or 3 years later, we kind of ran the same drill without a need to do it. Say, we're going to halve the marketing spend. Tell me how much we're going to drop revenue. And we barely dropped revenue, but made the product.
Why ever bother increasing it?
Exactly. But the point is, it always generates a bit more revenue, as you can see. But there's a point at which it becomes less and less and less efficient. And unless you go back and do this, you kind of miss this massive opportunity that's hiding in there.
But for the 1%, is it worth it?
Yeah, it's obviously not, but it doesn't start off with a 1%. It starts off with let's increase it by 5% and you get like 10 and this, and then suddenly at the end of it, the next giant increment isn't generating that much.
What have been the biggest hiring mistakes you've made?
I measure how many times do I say yes and it ends up not working out, or how many times do I say no? So generally, I rarely am hiring into my reports. I'll do a final round for a leader into one of my teams. So I'll say no, but I'll always tell my team, you can ignore my no, but this is what I expect that person to have done in 6 months' time, and you will, if that doesn't work out, you'll need to let them go. And sometimes they say, yeah, this person can totally do that, and I'm proved wrong. So on both accounts, I get it wrong about 20 to 30% of the time. And so what that told me, and this is after 10 years of trying, and having talked to others and watched others on this, I've learned that interviews aren't a substitute for the real thing, and you just have to hire quickly, try and support people as much as you can, and just sometimes it just won't work out.
Do you know what I love to do? I love to find a way to get them in beforehand, even for a day.
Yeah.
Just in a day, I can figure out, especially on content, it's a really quick feedback loop. If you're a good video editor, I know how you work.
That can work. But back to my interview questions. Love your feedback on this. So the two ones I ask are obviously a product one of talk me through an example of where you've been hands-on in building something. And then I always explain, when I say hands-on, I mean you ended up having to code it. You had to design it. You had to write the copy. But it is that, like, where do you go the extra mile? And which extra mile do you choose to go? And then it's quite quickly you find the people who've never done that, right? And always work through someone, and also just don't sweat the details. So that's at all levels we ask this question, even if you're coming in as effectively a VP of product for one of our sub areas. And then the second one is everyone has a reason for leaving where they are, and they're reasonably open about it, and they're joining Wise or wherever because they think that reason doesn't exist in the place they're going to. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I try to get this out of them, and the way I get that usually is by saying, talk me through what really frustrates you about where you are. And then you kind of get into, why does that really frustrate you? And then it'll always come down to the same things, like my boss isn't behaving rationally, right? And they aren't optimizing for revenue, they're optimizing for X, or they're being too short term, or this, or there's some toxic XYZ in there that I can't. And then the question is like, well, why couldn't you fix this, right? So what was the hard barrier that hit that meant, because if you're doing Wise, you're going to find these types of things, you need to be able to work through them, right?
Sure.
So why couldn't you fix this? And in that, you find two things. One is whether they're able to kind of self-reflect and say, actually, I understand why the CEO or the founder was behaving that way, and if I was in that role, I would have done that, and that's usually a big tick. Or sometimes they're like, nope, I don't get it. But ultimately, through this conversation, they're really talking about their limit, because they hit their limit somewhere, and you can kind of then evaluate, will they run into that every day, every week, every month, or every year at Wise, and therefore would it work?
How quickly do you know when you've made a bad hire?
Constantly impressed with people's ability to learn and develop. And I've learned not to trust my judgment on this, if that makes sense as well. Because I'm constantly, there are people that I said no to that have done amazingly well, and I learn from every day. And so I've learned not to, I don't believe that I uniquely, in an hour and a half
When you
interview,
reflect on those, what did you get wrong about that person estimation?
I think at the end of the day, we have our own preconceived ideas of how we solve problems. Like, I'm very opinionated on how I solve problems, and there are many other ways in which they can be solved. And all I really care about is the problem being solved, right? And the outcome happening, I don't really care how it happens. And sometimes the ways in which people work, I would look at and go, I would never do it that way. And therefore, I think you're going to fail, but sometimes they succeed and you learn something from it.
We're going to do a quick fire, okay? So I'm going to say a short statement. You're going to give me your immediate thoughts.
Okay, go for it.
So what's the most common, expensive, deadly mistake you see founders making?
Marketing. So thinking that you can just grow your startup by doing some magic on Facebook.
I'm so with you. Or thinking that hiring someone for growth will suddenly find product market fit. What's the most dangerous myth floating around specifically about startup growth, do you think?
Marketing. So I think it's the same thing around this, that there is some magical playbook. The bit I keep telling founders is every minute you put into product market fit or understanding what it's going to take to make a great product has such a huge return versus I'm going to find somebody who's going to solve the Facebook algorithm. Like, this isn't really what you should be spending your time on for the first 3 years.
I think it's also like there's so much focus on like channel diversification. And like it is so hard to get a channel working efficiently. I remember Kit Bodnar at HubSpot said, it takes one channel working well to get to 50 million in ARR and two to get to 100. And I think a lot of founders I meet kind of really focus on diversification before they've hit any meaningful revenue.
Totally.
It's like, fuck, if you get it working, double down. How does growth change in the world of AI? How does growth and product change in the world of AI?
For me at Wise, it is, how does it make payments faster? How does it make payments cheaper? So for us, it's kind of obvious. Like, we have big operational teams. We already use LLMs to augment those teams. Some places LLMs automate 100% some of those tasks. With regards to content, like you've seen what people can do with content with these wonderful tools. We're obviously experimenting with them as well. I think that's where the exciting.
What growth tactics stayed the same?
I still think there's this role for creativity. So you can run two ad campaigns. You can run them with the same growth tactics, same channels, same CPAs, same targeting, but one has a creative that is like got incredible cut through, incredibly talkable, incredibly viral, and one doesn't. And this is not formulaic yet, and there's still this opportunity for creativity that will always have an outsized return.
What have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
I think I'm beginning to believe the hype behind LLMs in places now and seeing them being practically useful at scale.
Where are you seeing them practically useful at scale that you didn't maybe believe before?
So you've obviously played around with them. You kind of can find the edges of where they start hallucinating and they're less useful, and you have to engineer like hell to get them there. Where I found it useful is when they're augmenting a person, if that makes sense. And then and there's still somebody driving a little bit. Haven't yet, but you can kind of see how it gets to the point that person will also not be needed in a while as well. So yeah, that's the bit on LLMs and AI in general. I think we're all getting it wrong in terms of where it will end up.
Tell me, final one. What was the most recent product or growth strategy, not including OpenAI, that you've been most impressed by?
Nubank and JP Morgan for two different reasons. So Nubank, very similar playbook to us, customer-led business, incredibly high word of mouth, incredibly high NPS. Low when you open their analyst investor presentations, it's how they brought down prices, how they made the payments faster, etc. So, but when I look at their culture, it's really, really strong, and we have a lot to learn from them. They're obviously ahead of us in terms of scale, great business. And at the other end of the scale, it's JP Morgan. So when I look at there have been large banks offering cross-border services for years. Biggest like Citi, HSBC, Barclays, to some extent, NatWest, JP Morgan. JP Morgan have a pretty good infrastructure. They built it out really well. They continue to innovate at scale and at the size they're at. And Jamie Dimon went pretty hard after payments. Payments have grown to be a material part of their business, and that is a real differentiator for them when they in their corporate banking, and they bank banks when they bank banks as well. So still very impressed and inspired by JP Morgan.
I love that. And I'm also pleased with those suggestions. I haven't had either of them before on the show. So that's a good one. Thank you so much for putting up with my prying questions. You've been fantastic.
No worries. Thanks for having me.